Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Sorry to be the one interrupting your lunch, but I just wanted to let you know what we're doing here. We're going to have lunch, obviously, and hopefully you've been through your first course. At this point, I'm going to call on our special guest, Crystal Patterson, who's the Global Civic Partnerships Director for Facebook. And then she's going to speak to us for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to have the main course. And then we will turn this into a discussion and a workshop, and there will be a moderator up here that will come and guide us through this process. Let me say before Crystal joins that I'm delighted that Facebook are with us for a second year running. We hear so much about social media. But the reality is that social media is here to stay. Technology can be a force for good, and we have to find a way to make it a force for good, because I personally believe that if we're going to capture the spirit of Athenian democracy with the 7 billion people in our world today, it's only technology that can help us do that. And I'm also happy that Facebook is again joined this year by the Kofi Annan Foundation. This was the case last year as well. The Commission is going really well, thriving, also meeting here in Athens, which I'm delighted about. I'm talking about the Commission of Elections and Democracy, the Annan Commission of Elections and Democracy in our digital age. And it's a great collaboration, actually, I believe, between Kofi Annan Foundation and Facebook. So, Crystal, without further ado, please join us, and thank you very much again for your support.
Good afternoon. Let me get my technology set up and then I'll be ready to talk. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Crystal Patterson. As Achilles mentioned, I head all of our global civic partnerships with Facebook. What this means is, as we think about elections and civic engagement around the world, one of the things we learned after 2016 is that we don't know all the answers and don't have all the information. And so we're trying to build up more relationships with vital organizations around the world who understand elections, who understand how politics are working, both in countries and in regions, and also just understand geopolitical dynamics that we not be as aware of in Menlo Park or in Washington, D.C., where I'm based. And these partnerships have become really critical to the work that we're doing every day at Facebook. We have more than 30,000 employees who are now dedicated to focusing on elections and our engagement with government and how we engage with politics around the world. And these partnerships really help inform our policy decisions, product decisions, and how we're thinking as a company about how we tackle the challenges of bringing technology and democracy together. First, I want to say thank you to the New York Times Foundation for having us here. This has been a wonderful collaboration for us. It's really great to hear the conversations that are happening and to hear a lot of the great ideas that are being exchanged at this event. And we're looking forward to having ongoing engagement as we move forward, because I think there's going to be a lot of great ideas and thinking that come out of our time here in Athens. So just briefly before we get to food, because I know everybody wants to enjoy a little lunch break, I just want to share a little bit about the main areas that we're focusing on as a company as it relates to elections and civic engagement. We have tried to pick out a few focus areas, but we are really taking a 360-degree approach to how we're thinking about elections, whether it's our tools. You know, a few years ago, it was very simply, you could share I voted in many countries on election day. We have obviously since then learned that there are lots of ways our tools are being used in elections. Oftentimes, that is in very positive ways. We have candidates and parties using our platform to share their message, educate people on issues, and encourage them to be part of the process in a way that wasn't possible 10 or 15 years ago, because they can reach people where they are on their phones. But obviously, with those opportunities also come challenges, as we've seen bad actors use our platforms to try to influence elections, influence debate, and cause trouble. We are learning from that every day. And I want to share with you some of the ways we're thinking about combating those challenges. First of all, we are focused on cracking down on fake accounts. This is the number one way a lot of trouble starts on the platform, and we've gotten better and better at it all the time. A lot of this work involves identifying patterns in how these fake accounts are created, and every time we do large account removals, we learn about how these actors are working and ways that they try to infiltrate the platform, which makes us faster and better at identifying future instances of it happening. In the 6-month period from October to March, I just want to get the number right because it's a big one, we removed more than 3.4 billion fake accounts from October to March of this year. That's more than double than we removed the 6 months before that, and that was an increase over the period before that. A lot of this happens, most of those accounts get removed before they ever do anything on the platform. With artificial intelligence and human reviewers, we're able to quickly identify these accounts and remove them, which again stops a lot of the bad material that was flying around on Facebook in previous elections that concerned people. We're also trying to stop the distribution of false news. We are not interested in being a censor. We believe in spirited debate, and we want people to be sharing information and talking to each other on Facebook, but we don't want false news to be circulated unchecked. So we have started to work with neutral third-party fact checkers around the world so that we have someone who isn't us helping identify when false news is happening on the platform. If someone shares false news and it gets reported to us, it will get sent to a fact checker. If information in that article is disputed, we will mark that post. We will also let the person who posted it know that there's disputed information in the information they shared, and also anyone who sees that post will also get notification that the information isn't necessarily accurate. We also will stop the distribution of that content on the platform. A lot of the challenge, obviously, is that there's virality on our platform. People love to share information, and in the case of false news, we're trying to limit how quickly that information gets shared. Another area we're really focused on is advertising. We want to make sure it's more transparent. It used to be that you couldn't really tell who was targeting with an ad or why. And again, from the 2016 election in the United States, we learned it's really important for people to understand who is showing them an ad and also why they may have been targeted. A lot of the divisive content we saw coming out of foreign actors was targeting communities either to incite them to be upset at other groups and voting for the wrong reasons, or to suppress certain groups and keep them from wanting to participate in the election. With our new ads authorization rules, you have to identify who you are to us. We have to know you're in the country where the election is taking place and where you want to run those ads. We've also cast a wide net on what we count as political content. So obviously it's about candidates and parties and campaigns, but we've also included a lot of issue ads as part of this. And this is to make sure that we have a lot of topics now that are very controversial for people in elections, things like immigration, race relations, you name it. And we saw those used to sow division in the 2016 election in the United States and in subsequent elections around the world. And so now if you want to run ads around those topics, you also have to be authorized. What that means is you send us some identification. We also will show more information about the page that's running ads. So if you look at a page on Facebook, you can see where the admins are located. And any ad that you are being shown, you'll be able to see who the targets are for that ad. So age, general geographic location, and how much was spent on them. And this is all designed to give you a better sense of why you may have been targeted for an ad, and hopefully to develop, we want our audience to have some media literacy. So when they're seeing information on the platform, they're asking, why am I seeing this? Who's showing it to me? What is their motive? And then to complement that, in many countries around the world, we've started running media literacy campaigns to encourage people to be thoughtful as they're looking at content on the platform and think about why it's being shown to them. We're also just in general trying to disrupt bad actors and also be more transparent as we do that. If you go to our newsroom, you can see a running accounting of when we've removed clusters of fake accounts or pages from given countries. And we try to share as much information as we can about where we've identified this activity and actions we've taken to remove it from the platform. We are also obviously working with key partners, with governments, to try to help identify information and keep these bad actors from doing things on the platform, because these are against our community standards and we think they have no place in free and fair elections. And then finally, I want to talk about the positives of Facebook and elections, which I think often gets lost in the discussion of a lot of these defensive maneuvers that we've taken to make sure the platform is safe. Every day, hundreds, thousands of candidates are using Facebook to help introduce themselves to voters, to help educate people on issues. Advocacy groups on a daily basis are helping people understand better what these issues mean for them in day-to-day life. They use posts, they use notes, they use live. And we really think it's important to the discourse that this tool continue to be free and open for people. I spent a lot of time working on women's political engagement, and our applications are some of the easiest ways for a candidate who may not work within the traditional party machinery and may not have traditional fundraising resources to build a name for themselves and to get their voice out to the public. So even as we see all these challenges with social media, this technology, the internet, these applications, whether it's ours or Twitter, really create an avenue for new candidates and new voices to be heard in the political system, and we think that's really important here in the birthplace of democracy. I think it's important to remember that, all of this started because elections are important and because people are really wanting to participate. And I think we can all agree that around the world we're in some really important political moments, and having opportunities to share that information is essential. So we're going to continue to work on this. We continue to look to partners, and I consider all of you partners because I think the criticism, the praise, all of it helps us get better as we're trying to tackle these challenges. I think Facebook is the focal point for a lot of this right now. But one thing I keep pointing out to people is that we weren't the first social network. We're not going to be the last. I think because we're so big, this is why it's in everyone's face and we want to get it right. But we're going to have to work together to kind of solve these challenges, not just on our platform, but on how technology is going to shape democracy into the future. And I think if we work together, we can really figure this out. So I just want to thank you all for being here. I'm going to join the panel later, and I think we'll have some time for question and answer. So hopefully I didn't talk too fast, but I wanted to get you all to your entrees. I also want to point out we have a Facebook lounge adjacent to this room. I'm there along with several of my teammates, and we'd love to talk to you. So if you want to get more in depth about this stuff and ask me more detailed questions, and if we don't get to it today, I'm happy to give you my card. Happy to follow up with you separately. But again, thank you for your time, and viva democracy. Is that appropriate for where we are today? Okay. Thank you all so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, excuse me. I'm so sorry to interrupt your conversations, which, having been at lunches like this, very often your conversations are more interesting than our conversations. But it's a great pleasure to be here. Again, I'm Steve Erlanger. I'm with the New York Times. I'm the Chief European Diplomatic Correspondent. And we have this Facebook lunch on the topic of electoral integrity. And I must say, Facebook has a certain amount to answer for, which Crystal was very good at acknowledging. I have a confession. I never trusted Facebook. I've never signed up for Facebook. I don't have a Facebook account. Never wanted one. Still don't have one, though someone made me a page, apparently. So I'm out there, but I'm not. I guess I don't have any friends, or maybe I have enough friends. But I do want to thank you, Crystal. It's important for Facebook to be open about issues and problems and what you're doing about it. And I have some sympathy, I have to say, given the size of Facebook. It's, what, 1 billion users or something?
More than 2,
Yeah, I mean, it's like unimaginable. And how you police 10 people, let alone 1 billion people, is beyond me. I mean, half the time I can't police myself, let alone everybody else. So I'm sure we'll come back to attack you.
Great,
but
I'm ready.
First, we have very interesting co-sponsor, which is the Kofi Annan Foundation. I'm one of the great admirers of Kofi Annan, and I think the world misses him, to be honest. But the foundation set up in his name has done a big commission on elections and democracy in the digital age. So, I mean, that's what we're about. We have 2 representatives of that foundation, Laura Chinchilla, to my left, who's the former president of Costa Rica and chair of this commission, and Steve Stedman, who's the Secretary General. And they've done a study of the problem of electoral integrity. So first I was going to ask Laura to just explain what the Kofi Annan Foundation does and a little bit about how you see the problem. We have, maybe 25 minutes tops, and I would like to have some questions from you. So as we talk, think about it. So don't be shocked when I say let's have some questions. Have a couple in mind. Laura, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Bon appetit. Well, I will talk about what the Kofi Annan Foundation is doing concerning the issues we have been discussing. Because to talk about Kofi Annan legacy, we wouldn't have time, and we have the president of the foundation who can do a better job than me. But basically, the Kofi Annan Foundation decided some years ago to start working on something which is very important, and that has to do with electoral integrity, which is a very important pillar of any democracy. We have been discussing here that in many cases, we just stayed in that first phase of democracies, electoral democracies, and we forgot about other kind of important pillars such as the rule of law, the independence of powers, human rights respects, and so on. But at the same time, we have to recognize that we still have challenges concerning the elections all around the world. And when it comes to talk about the challenges, the Kofi Annan Foundation in the past created a commission to face those challenges. Among those challenges, I just will mention very fast some of them, such as remove the barriers, legal, administrative, economic, social barriers, to guarantee the universal participation in the processes. Also trying to build professional and independent electoral bodies, electoral management bodies of the electoral processes. And also something which is very important, a very important challenge, even today, which has to do with regulating opaque political financing. And the fourth kind of challenge, which has to do with the issue of social media and in general with communication and media outlets, has to do with enhancing public deliberation. So when we talk about this issue, is when we decided to come with this first stage of the job that the Kofi Annan Foundation is doing. And that has to do with elections, democracy in the digital age. So there are basically three major concerns that we have. The issue of polarization, the issue of disinformation, and hate speech. We also are very concerned about what is happening in the global south, because most of the attention had been in what is happening in the industrialized countries, United States, in Europe. We already have many analyses, studies, recommendations, and even some practices that are being applied. But not much have been said about the global south, and there we have a big challenge because some are very weak democracies, and they have polarized kind of environments, they have weak institutions, high distrust in those institutions. So when we analyze the impact of social media, it is not the same when we consider the industrialized nations and the global south. Okay. So that is basically what we are trying to do, analyze the impact of social media in electoral processes, electoral integrity, with a very special attention on what is happening in the Global South. Steve will be able to give you more details about our findings at this point and some probably of the recommendations that we are planning to deliver.
That's a great segue, Steve. Let's hear more about what you've found in your study.
Sure.
Please, go ahead.
So this is a pretty complicated field, and you want to be able to base your analysis actually on evidence and empirical research.
No one else does.
So here's a couple things. The first one is that not all countries are equally susceptible to disinformation and hate speech. That is, there's a particular toxic brew that makes you vulnerable. Do you have pre-existing polarization, pre-existing partisan media, and pre-existing low trust, both amongst citizens, but also citizens towards their own institutions, their government? When you have that mix, that's when sort of network propaganda and disinformation has its largest impact, negative impact. Second finding that goes hand in hand with this is that it's a systemic problem. There are a lot of good reasons to be angry at the platforms, right? There's a lot of good reasons to be angry at the platforms. What they've done with data, what they've done with your privacy, not being able to foresee what was going to happen, slow in reacting, all that stuff, right? But the fact is that where disinformation and hate speech has a negative impact, it's actually a systemic problem. So in the United States, the biggest spreader of disinformation and hate speech is not InfoWars or Breitbart. It's the President of the United States. Secondly, even greater than the impact of InfoWars and Breitbart, it doesn't compare with the reach and impact of Fox News, Hannity, and then Rush Limbaugh, right? So it's all great to say, you, the platforms, have to do a bunch of things, and then we can pretend that the problem's going to go away. It's not. We could get rid of the internet tomorrow, right? The only people that would be happy, in fact, you'd still have the same problems that we have. The only people who would be happy are authoritarian leaders and parents, right? That would be, those are the only people who would be happy, right? So in thinking about how do you deal with this in the Global South, right, where you have weak institutions, weak rule of law, one big finding is that elections are going to be focal points of instability as we go forward. The literature on democracy likes to treat elections as sort of boutique items. They don't really count. There's this long line, but democracy is so much more than elections. True, but you can't have democracy without elections. And going forward, these elections are going to take place. High polarization, partisan media, low trust, and existing repertoires of violence. And when you have those, it could be very nasty. And so that's why we've spent so much time looking at the problems in the Global South. And I'm happy to talk about recommendations, but it depends on where you want to take it.
Let's sort of get to that, because I mean, one of the things that I was, as an American, one thing I do know is this is going to be the ugliest presidential campaign in my lifetime. Partly for all the reasons that you said. Division, the country's very divided, people are angry, the president tweets whatever on his mind because he's an unmatched genius, as he keeps telling us, right? But I'm curious about whether you think Facebook is really prepared, is really doing enough to get ready for what we know is going to be an ugly, vicious campaign. Crystal, do you?
Is that for me? Great.
That's for you.
So I think
Others can answer it.
Sure.
Too.
Yeah. I think we are not being cocky about being ready for this. I think one thing we've also been transparent about, in addition to trying to be more open about how we're trying to address these problems, is that the threat is constantly evolving. And Cheryl has said this is going to be whack-a-mole for us. The people who are using the internet to disrupt elections and to cause distrust, trouble, are constantly coming up with new ways and are able to do it in larger numbers, with using automation and, I mean, the
By
number.
Cheryl, you mean Sheryl Sandberg.
Sheryl Sandberg, I'm sorry.
We're not
yes.
all on first-person relationships.
I am not either.
with her.
I apologize. I am not either. That's just internal shorthand.
It's very American. Okay.
Apologies. I didn't mean for that to sound like that at all.
I'm just teasing you. I'm sorry.
But I cited that number about how many fake accounts we'd removed in a 6-month period. I think that's a really good indicator of how quickly and how big these actors can move when they have technology themselves. And so I don't think we're pretending that we're going to have all the answers up front, but I do think we have taken what we've learned and are trying to kind of foresee better based on what we've learned, what we think those threats are going to be.
Do you imagine after the last election, when we know of Russian meddling, other meddling, I mean, are you expecting, because we now see it, that there'll be less of it? Or do you think we're going to face the same issue again?
I think it'll still be there. It'll look different. Yeah. And we have learned a lot since 2016. I mean, you probably didn't hear much about us in the 2018 midterms, and there's good reason for that. We were, I think, much more prepared for understanding what the trouble could look like. And those were actually pretty spirited elections for a midterm in terms of just engagement and people paying attention and people talking about it. So I think that was a good test run for us to see if we had really started to get our act together after 2016. And again, the fact that you didn't hear much about us, I think, is an endorsement of the fact that we did move the needle quite a bit. But we are, I constantly talk about how now we're defensive drivers in a way that we had not been before. We used to really just focus on innovation and what's a cool new tool we could build, how do we get as many people using it as we can. When we launched Live, it was like, oh, you can be at the birthday party. Oh, I know. Media organizations can use this stuff. We didn't think about, we weren't always focused on the negative ways people could use these tools, and that is now kind of baked into our process in a way that it wasn't before. Okay. And so I think this defensive driving will help us be more ready. But again, we are not resting on the assumption that we've got it all together. We're assuming we're going to see new things, and we're just trying to be ready for all of them as much as we can be.
Great. I mean, do you think, Steve, go ahead. Do you want
in terms of looking to 2020, the first thing I would say is that the United States is not prepared for what's going to hit it in 2020. Now, having said that, I would say that Facebook is probably better prepared than the U.S. government is. That is, this has been a huge concern of the intelligence communities in terms of protecting voting infrastructure from hacking and from outside interference. And it's gotten caught up into the polarized politics, with one party in particular deciding that actually it doesn't seem to be a problem and states are best positioned to deal with it. But it's a potential nightmare because there are certain places in the United States, certain states that are more important than others in a presidential election. It's going to be ripe opportunities for those outsiders or insiders. We keep talking about outside manipulation, but what we're seeing is over time is that domestic groups are getting into the game, right?
And also political parties are getting into the game. I mean, it's not like they're ignorant of how to manipulate social media. Laura?
Yes, I would like to add something else. It is true that all of those platforms have been under fire because of the different situations during the last years. But it is also true, and I recognize they have been taking very important measures, very positive measures. But it is very important for them to understand that every context is different. So they have very sensitive to the differences among the different regions. Just let me give you an example. I was a member of the Electoral Observation Mission in 2016 in the United States, and I remember that we learned a lot about the role of Facebook in that election. And I also participated in 2018 in the Brazilian elections. I was the chief of the Electoral Mission. And at that time, we went there, and even the technological platforms, looking at Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, But the surprise was that in Brazil, the preferred platform was not those platforms, was WhatsApp. And that created a totally different kind of challenges.
And it's owned by Google.
Because they are encrypted platforms.
It's owned by
And
Facebook.
so-
I just want to clarify, WhatsApp's owned by Facebook.
Whoops.
Just so we're not hiding.
Transparency.
So the point here is,
Transparency
they
in
have
action.
to be...
That's right. Sorry.
Transparency.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. But the point here is that the context matters. And so they have to be able to create local partners so they can be able to anticipate what is going to happen in the next electoral process. I mean, what is the political environment, but also the different uses of technology from the different kind of populations all around the world.
Yeah. Can I address
Crystal, go
that?
ahead.
She's absolutely right. A lot of our work, this is what I spend most of my days on actually, is finding the right folks to learn from who are focusing on these things. So we work with the National Democratic Institute, International Republican Institute, our friends at IFAS who are, experts on understanding the dynamics around elections and local context. And we really interface with their experts all the time to better understand the dynamics on the ground, as they say, so that we're better understanding context around these elections. There are vagaries within cities, within countries that we're just not going to get in Menlo Park or Washington, D.C., and we do really rely on expertise like that to try to help make decisions, and that is a big shift for us over the last few years. So we have heard that criticism, we're trying to adjust accordingly.
I mean, one of the great challenges, since we're talking about democracy, there is free speech.
Yeah.
And how you draw the line between real speech and free speech. You're also allowed to lie. That's part of freedom of speech, right? So you can't remove everything. That makes no sense. So, part of what I always wonder about, you use yourself the metaphor of being a driver. What always used to bother me about Facebook, which was obviously a very profitable advertising company, right, is the way it pretended it was just a highway and it had no responsibility for whoever was using it. Don't ask us, we're just the highway, right? So that's changed now, but as you think about the future, what are the new things that you're finding that make you anxious? First of all, and then I'll go to Steve.
Well, I would say we've had community standards for a long time. I think, we look at them as sort of a living thing. We are constantly kind of looking at how those standards fit into the real world and how people are using our platform. We've also, as part of our transparency efforts, tried to make them more public so people understood the rules of the road. For a long time, it wasn't always clear to people what they were getting in trouble for. They also didn't have a way to appeal if they felt like they were being put in Facebook jail, as everybody likes to call it, unfairly. And we've really tried to change some of those processes and structures so people can appeal. And it is a big challenge when you have more than 2 billion people trying to communicate with different cultures, standards, coming up with rules that apply to everybody. So we have put those community standards up. We are constantly kind of looking at what our standards for hate speech are so that they keep pace with what's happening in the world. And sometimes it's a challenge. I want to give one example. Pepe the Frog, which started out as sort of an innocent cartoon character, obviously evolved into a symbol of white nationalism. And I've been using that as an example for a couple of years now, but I also recently discovered that the youth that are protesting in Hong Kong, some of them are using Pepe as a symbol of freedom for them. And so depending on the context, this cartoon character means something different in different regions of the world. So now you can't just say Pepe the Frog isn't allowed, because there are people who are using it in positive ways. And these are the challenges we have as we're trying to thread the needle on these things. So, that's a very small example compared to a lot of the issues many of you were thinking about, but that just encapsulates kind of the challenge we have. So I think for us, again, it's just to continue to think about our standards and how they fit into the real world in real time.
Yeah, I just want to say on freedom of speech, they're a private corporation, right? They can make their own decisions. There's no First Amendment, right? They don't have to live up to that.
They're not publishers, right?
Right. Well, they have to decide, right, what content is put is allowed to be put on it, and then it has decisions that it can make in terms of spread. So as one of my colleagues at Stanford, René DeResta, likes to say, freedom of speech is not freedom of reach. You can put it up there, but we can also tweak with our algorithms to make sure it's not going to get very spread around, right? And so you can do that with the kind of speech that you make a judgment. Really, does everybody need to see this? Do they really need to see awful, just invective towards immigrants, towards whoever you want to put up there? Now, I said Facebook is better prepared than the US government is for 2020. When it comes to the takedowns of sort of fake, inauthentic actors, they've gotten really good, right? And so they will be on top of things coming in from outside the country, bots, all that stuff. Now, they have a particular issue, right, that has to do with what are you going to accept for political advertising? So if you followed in the last week, they set community standards, and then they made what I think is a very questionable decision that when it comes to political advertising, actually the standards are not going to be applied to politicians. If you are a politician, you are not constrained by community standards. And so you've already had this issue whereby CNN refused an ad from the Trump campaign because they said, that's lies, that's complete disinformation, it's not true, so we're not accepting it. And then Facebook made the decision to take it. Now, there's all kinds of difficulties in trying to deal with political advertising in terms of truth, right? I remember when I was growing up, there was a board game, politics, lie, cheat, and steal, the game of politics, right? So it's tempting to step behind that and say, well, anything goes in political campaigns and it's up to voters to decide. But you can do gradations, and when you have a claim, for instance, that Joe Biden expressly promised Ukraine the following, blah, 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 right? And it is demonstrably false, you should not be putting that out as advertising, right? Yeah. You can make that choice. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it goes back to these basic problems of who decides and who elected who to decide what.
Can I make one clarification?
Yeah, quickly.
So, I agree. I think this is something we're going to have lots of discussion about. We don't allow, our community standards do still apply, so something that would cause real world harm, that has hate speech normally, but we don't do fact checking for political ads. So I just want to make sure when we're debating this, no, that's fine. You can tell me why that's messed up too, but I just want to clarify, like if there was a risk of real world harm to someone, that wouldn't be allowed to run. We have created some barriers, and again, I'm sure you'll have thoughts on that, and that's fine, but I just want to clarify, it isn't just, you can say anything
in
you
the
want.
Facebook lounge.
Yeah.
That's right. We only have a few minutes left, but I do want to have a couple questions. There's a gentleman way in the back. Could you identify yourself?
And many people here.
I don't know if there's a mic coming.
Oh yeah,
yes,
we've got a
mic
handheld.
coming.
That's great.
And let's ask a question. Don't make a long speech, please.
Sure. My name is Mike. I'm from the UK. So we talked a lot about Facebook or social media's role within democracies, by which we usually mean, it seems, democratization of governments. But obviously corporations are taking on huge power, often in economic terms larger than governments. So my question is there a debate at all about how Facebook itself could be further democratized in terms of its decision-making on what goes, what doesn't go? Because you're obviously just trying to launch the currency, the Libra. Would it be so much a stretch of imagination if you've already got an online digital currency to make that currency also perhaps a vote token that's distributed through universal basic income equally, that we could all make decisions and participate in these discussions? Thanks.
Yeah.
Good questions. This lady down here, and then this gentleman, and then we'll go back to the panel. Okay. Thank you.
Artemis Seifert, Atlantic Council, and also Stanford University. I want to push you on this question of objective standard for what is true and what's not. So you mentioned earlier that one of the things you do to combat fake news is point out disputed content.
Yes.
But in a polarized world, everything can be disputed, which means at the same time nothing is disputed, right? Because it's really hard to point to an objective standard of what is true or not. So what I want to hear more from you is, given that we live in a world of increasing fragmentation of epistemic authority, right, with the collapse of mainstream media, the proliferation of sources, how are you thinking about what kinds of true and what doesn't, right? So what are the standards for objectivity when it comes to truth, and how do you decide where to apply them? Why not in political campaigns, for example? And to this point of reach, right? So do you correlate objectivity in what you find with what is presented on Facebook and how far it goes?
Okay, very good, very complicated, but
Very
excellent
short question.
questions. And then this gentleman here, and I'm really sorry about cutting everybody off now, but please.
Hi, Ian Walker, New Democracy Foundation in Australia. Question for anyone on the panel, but Crystal, you'll probably find it too easy. I just want you to comment on a simple analogy. At 8 years old, I nearly got thrown out of Catholic school for questioning Noah's Ark. And when my parents were called in, my father said, if it doesn't stand up to an 8-year-old, don't blame the 8-year-old. The analogy is, if elections are so easily defeated by Facebook ads that cost a few cents to run, why are we blaming Facebook and not blaming elections?
Okay, very
not
good.
blaming what?
Oh, I would love for someone else to take that question.
Not blaming elections.
Most of the questions are for her.
Exactly.
Blaming elections.
So, I mean, why don't we go to each of you, just be as brief as you can, and answer what you can, and anyone who's unhappy can go find Crystal.
Sure.
I have to go
later.
first?
Yeah, so Steve, why don't you start?
I go
and
first?
Laura,
Yeah, oh,
and
yes,
then-
yes,
we
yes.
go this way.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's great. I love that.
The first question on democratizing Facebook, I think it's actually, it's not democratizing per se, but it does get caught up with the debates and the importance of diversifying Silicon Valley. Because you have, who is it that makes decisions about the algorithms? Who is it that makes decisions about what to take down, what's disinformation, what's true, et cetera? Is it going to be a bunch of 25-year-old bros? Or is it actually going to have workers who actually kind of look like America or look like the world, right? And so diversity becomes a very important aspect of dealing with this first question. The second question, I'll be old-fashioned. I believe in objective truth. Now, that's a rare statement these days, but I feel emboldened because one of my colleagues at Stanford, Josh Landy, who's a philosopher, just wrote a beautiful defense of objectivity, basically saying we went really wrong in the 1970s and 80s, and actually there is something called objective truth, and we ought to start standing up to it.
Quickly.
Third, I actually think...
Let's skip
Okay.
third.
No,
'cause
third. Third,
I'm
quick.
really being pushed very hard,
Okay.
and we have 2 other colleagues to speak. So go ahead, Laura. I apologize. I mean, seriously, we can continue it outside, but the program must continue. I'm simply a cog in this factory. So please, go ahead.
Well, no, I will just like to because I share part of the responses that Steve already did, but I would like to just close with a kind of general reflection, because we cannot forget what is this about, and this is about the kind of societies and the kinds of citizens we have been nurtured for many years. Social media did not create the problem. They amplified the problem. If we don't like what we see in social media, it's like when we look at a mirror, and it won't be enough just twinkle the mirror, And social media is a blunt reflect of the kind of societies we have nurtured. So at the end, we politicians, I include myself, we politicians, traditional media, all the media outlets, the electoral industry, all of us have a very huge responsibility.
Can
30 seconds.
Yep, sure. So on the transparency, I'll get to yours too. The transparency, Stephen, you're absolutely right. We do need to work on more diversity. I can say this as a woman of color who works at a tech company. we need more people who look like the world in the room making the decisions. And I think we have, as I've been at Facebook for about 5.5 years, and I've seen us move towards focusing on that more as a priority. I think that's totally right. We've also, again, with more transparency, gives more opportunities for people to tell us where they think we're screwing up. We were a black box in a lot of ways for a long time. And I think, as you can see by some of the ways we're trying to be out there about what we're working on, what we've messed up, and how we're trying to plan ahead. We're trying to be more open in that way. We also have what we are calling an oversight board to bring in folks who aren't Facebook employees to help make some of these big decisions as we're looking at future policies and how we're kind of stewarding the platform going forward. On your question of objective truth, that is a big debate that I'm not sure I'm the right person to talk about. What I will say, and you're right, we aren't the government and we aren't beholden to First Amendment anything, but we do want many voices to be heard, and we want real debate on the platform. So we do try to stay out of it as much as we can. We don't want to be censors, even though we're not the government, so it's not technically censorship. In terms of the fact checkers, we work with what are kind of universally recognized as objective third-party folks, so that we aren't the arbiters of truth. We don't think that's our role, and we certainly wouldn't pretend that we can tell what objective truth is. And I think Laura's right to your question. Some of these issues aren't really about social media. It's about how we're functioning as humans in democracies, in non-democracies, and how we want our discourse to look. But we are a big part of that, and we're trying to own our piece of it.
Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
That was awesome. Thank you.